The day I went to Harbor City, Willow unexpectedly got engaged to someone else. Everyone thought I would rush back to Beijing that night and cause a scene at the engagement party. But they didn't know that I neither planned to go back nor make a fuss. Because what nobody expected was that before going to Harbor City, I had already happily gotten engaged to someone else. From then on, you go your way, I'll cross my bridge. We don't need to think about seeing each other anymore. The last time I confessed to Willow, I made quite a fool of myself. There were many people sitting in the private room, but it was dead silent. Not a single person spoke. Minutes passed, and it was Makoto who finally stood up to break the tension. "George, you're Willow's brother. Isn't this inappropriate?" A thug in the corner snickered. "What's inappropriate, orphan with different fathers and mothers?" Laughter erupted, gradually becoming a chorus. I glanced at Willow, who was covering her mouth and laughing so hard she was shaking. Gritting my teeth, I yanked the guy who called me an orphan up by his collar and punched him in the nose. The next second, Willow shouted, "George, stop! Do you want me to say something even more hurtful?" She frowned, stood up, and looked at me, saying, "I've clearly rejected you many times before. Why do you keep pestering me?" I pushed the guy away, forced a smile, and asked, "Rejected me? So when I started dating someone, why did you throw a fit and cry?" She replied, "That's because you're my brother, Liu family's adopted son. If you randomly marry some random person, it'll make it hard for my parents." I laughed and said, "What about that kiss on my 20th birthday?" Willow looked into my eyes with a hint of disdain. She said, "George, I was drunk that night. My mind was all over the place. You don't really think that kissing you means I like you, do you?" I pinched my brow and said in a low voice, "Willow, you've had 4 boyfriends behind my back. But each time I taught them a lesson and you immediately broke up with them," I pressed on. "And then you acted all cute, saying you wouldn't do that again. Why?" She replied, "That's because I hadn't met someone I truly liked." As she said this, she nestled into Makoto's arms, saying, "George, listen clearly. This is the last time I'll say it. I like Makoto and I'm marrying him. Your previous tactics won't work this time." Makoto looked smug and affectionately gazed at her, saying, "Willow." Without hesitation, she stood on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. Makoto held the back of her head, responding more passionately. They kissed intensely, oblivious to everyone around them. At that moment, I recalled that kiss from my 20th birthday. It was just as lingering, and it had led me to dream for 4 years without waking up, blindly believing she liked me. Willow moved out of the Liu family's old house and started living with Makoto. On the day she moved out, I was busy with my graduation defense at school. Choosing such a day was probably to prevent me from causing trouble for Makoto. But this time, I didn't feel the rage I usually did. After a brief moment of displeasure, I quickly shook my head and put it all behind me. That evening, I had a graduation dinner with some close classmates. Yet even though I didn't go looking for him, he came looking for me. On my way to the restroom, I ran into Makoto. He said to me, "George, Willow is here too. Are you going to see her?" I shook my head. "I'm with my classmates, so I won't go." Suddenly, Makoto leaned closer and said, "George, I advise you not to meddle. If you speak ill of me in front of Liu's parents, I'll make sure you regret it." I pushed him away with a smile. "Mr. Yi, if you hadn't said anything, I wouldn't have thought of it. Since you've brought it up, if I don't speak ill of you, doesn't that mean you wasted your breath?" A flicker of fear crossed his eyes. I continued to mock him. "I heard your dad has spent a few years in prison for extortion. Have you told Willow about that? I should remind Uncle and Auntie." In the next moment, Makoto punched my left shoulder, but I didn't dodge. I quickly kicked his knee, and he let out a yelp of pain and knelt down. That was when I realized my left shoulder was throbbing. Upon closer inspection, I saw he had been holding a key that had dug into me. Rage surged within me. I wanted nothing more than to drag him into the restroom and teach him a lesson. But the next second, a sharp voice rang out. "George, what are you doing?" Before I could react, a slap landed hard on my face. I turned to see Willow, expressionless, the first time she had ever laid a hand on me. Makoto rubbed his knee and said, "Willow, don't misunderstand. George might just be in a bad mood today." Willow glared at me, visibly upset. "You're still defending him? He's always bullying others. I've really had enough." Willow bent down to help Makoto up. She shot me a cold look, her eyes filled with anger. "George, apologize." I remained silent. She shouted again, "You jerk, apologize!" Makoto, assisted by her, subtly smirked at me, looking all too pleased with himself. My shoulder was bleeding. Blood trickled down my arm, forming two glaring lines. But it seemed Willow didn't even notice. Her gaze suggested I was a heinous villain. I couldn't help but laugh self-deprecatingly. I spread my hands and asked, "Why should I apologize?" Willow looked momentarily taken aback, but quickly bit her lip, saying, "Why don't you apologize for bullying him?" I replied shamelessly, "Why would I bully others if I didn't bully him?" Willow's face flushed with anger as she scolded, "You're truly shameless. If my parents knew you were this kind of person..." I interrupted her, implying, "Your parents probably need to know." Makoto looked at me and quickly tried to soothe Willow. "Let it go, Willow." "How can I let it go?" Willow instantly felt a surge of sympathy for him. She said, "George, I've told you before. Makoto is different from others. No matter how you bully him, I won't break up with him. It'll only make me love him more and hate you more." With that, she helped Makoto turn and leave. I stood there contemplating for a long while. The pain in my shoulder was sharp, but my heart felt oddly empty and light. I realized at that moment that all those so-called obsessions had turned to dust, completely vanished. They could do as they wished. It was none of my concern. That night, Makoto posted 3 updates on his WeChat moments, all of which were screenshotted and sent to me by some people in our circle with ulterior motives. Especially Willow's reply, which was particularly highlighted. I knew they secretly wanted to see me humiliated. In the past, I might have let their interactions provoke me and sought out those thugs for a beating. Then she would immediately break up with them and come to me, saying she wouldn't act like that again, giving me the false impression she actually cared about me. But this time I ignored it. Instead, I dialed a number from 7 days ago. "Ms. Zhao, this is George. I've thought about what you mentioned the other day. When I was 7, my parents died unexpectedly. Uncle Liu, who had a good relationship with my dad, took me in. Aunt Zhao was my mother's best friend from her youth. However, later she eloped with her lover, and my mother supported her with some money to start a business in Harbor City. But by the time she established herself there, my parents were already gone. Aunt Zhao wanted me to live in Harbor City, as the business my mother had partnered with her on was still managed by her, and now it was ready to be handed back to me. On the other hand, she hinted at wanting to fulfill the promise she made with my mother when they were young, wanting me to fulfill the betrothal agreement made between me and her daughter. 7 days ago I hadn't agreed, not wanting to offend her, only saying I would consider it. But tonight I had let go of all those years of obsession. My foolish behavior as a lovesick simp felt ridiculous. I didn't want to be the laughingstock of the circle anymore. It was better to start fresh elsewhere. 6 months ago, Willow insisted I go to school in Harbor City, even having a tantrum with Uncle Liu over it. But I had never agreed. Now I felt it was a great opportunity. Perhaps it was fate's arrangement after all. On the other end of the line, Aunt Zhao was laughing joyfully, saying, "George, your sister Anna is waiting for your approval. She can't wait to fly to Beijing to pick you up herself." I held the phone, feeling inexplicably shy. Even though I had promised to move to Harbor City, the next moment felt like my life was already being arranged for me. Yet it didn't seem so bad. The sounds of laughter in my ears made me feel dazed. After 15 years of living together and 7 years of liking someone, it turned out that letting go completely only took a mere 7 days. The day Willow and Makoto got engaged was deliberately chosen to coincide with my arrival in Harbor City. As a result, not many people came to see me off. When I got off the plane, I opened my phone and was flooded with messages, many of which were about Willow and Makoto's engagement. I chuckled and deleted those contacts, blocking them all. Before coming to Harbor City, I met with Anna. I didn't want any complications or to draw attention to ourselves. Anna agreed with my intentions. We exchanged rings and had a low-key engagement. Now, my account held an additional 100 million in profit sharing, and on our middle fingers we wore simple rings. As I gathered my thoughts and prepared to head to Anna's house, my phone suddenly rang. It was Willow's cousin Domingo. "George, my sister's engagement ceremony is about to start. Where are you?" I replied, "I just arrived in Harbor City." He urged, "You need to hurry back, you can still make it." I calmly asked, "What for?" Domingo hesitated before saying, "George, are you really that thick-headed? If you don't come back to teach Makoto a lesson, my sister will really be someone else's." I was speechless. I asked, "Why should I go back to confront him? Isn't this a happy occasion for your sister?" Domingo's voice rose in panic. "George, are you out of your mind? Just as I was about to hang up, Makoto's voice came through the line. "George, aren't you coming to my engagement ceremony with Willow? Willow considers you her brother, so that makes me your brother-in-law. I'd really like to have your blessing." It was a well-rehearsed duet, but it didn't mean much to me. I looked at Anna in the distance. She was leaning against the car, graceful and gentle. My heart felt completely at ease. I said, "All right then, I wish you both a long and happy life together." Willow wore a beautiful silk satin gown. Her hair was styled in a lovely braid and her makeup was light. At that moment, she was enjoying matcha cake with a few close friends in the garden. However, every so often, she would glance over at Domingo and the others nearby. She knew they were likely informing George of her whereabouts, just like countless times before. Whenever there was a male presence around her, those people would immediately tell George. Then George would come running to cause trouble, even to the point of getting into a fight. She despised George's possessiveness and hated how men would fight over her, feeling as if they were objectifying her. But deep down, she understood that this very behavior allowed her to easily dismiss those men. This time, she figured George would likely come looking for trouble as well. That's why she had chosen the day I arrived in Harbor City for her engagement. Unfortunately, the auspicious time for the ceremony was set for 6 in the evening. Willow was feeling rather unhappy about that. After all, if George caught wind of it, he would immediately fly back, possibly arriving just in time for the ceremony to start. One of her friends remarked, "Willow, what if George comes back looking for you?" "Yeah, if you're engaged to someone else, I bet he'll be furious if he finds out." Another friend added, "But it seems he's been unusually quiet lately. You and Makoto are all lovey-dovey and he hasn't made a peep. If it were in the past, he would have stormed in already." Willow took a small forkful of cake but hesitated to eat it. Her mind was racing with her friend's last comments. George had indeed been unusually quiet, almost too calm. But based on her understanding of him, he wasn't the type to just let things go. Since childhood, she had rejected him numerous times, yet he always persisted, never backing down. Now it seemed he had become much steadier. Suddenly Willow had a thought. She smirked lightly and popped the tiny bite of cake into her mouth. "Just wait and see. He won't leave me that easily." One friend asked, "Willow, are you saying George will come back to cause trouble?" Willow didn't respond but felt a strong conviction inside her. George had always been a lovesick fool. No matter how capricious she was, he would always convince himself to tolerate her. He couldn't bear the thought of Willow getting hurt more than he cared about his own pride. Willow knew that George was just retreating to advance. She was sure that by the time the engagement ceremony started, George would show up. Looking at the time on her phone, she said, "You all need to tell security to keep a close watch. Don't let any weird people in to cause trouble." Just as she finished speaking, she saw Domingo striding in confidently. "Cousin, it's George. He's here, the car's outside." Willow felt a sudden surge of excitement but quickly kept a cold expression. "I think he's just stubborn and won't let me go." Domingo replied, "Sister, what are you going to do? If he causes a scene, it'll be embarrassing for the Liu family." Willow scoffed and stood up gracefully, lifting her skirt as she walked outside. "I'll go see what he intends to do." The group of friends followed Willow outside, but as soon as they left the garden, Makoto called out to her. "Willow." Makoto was dressed in a well-tailored deep blue suit with a simple silver-gray tie. The engagement ceremony was at 6 o'clock, still a few hours away. Makoto felt anxious inside, but he didn't show it. He asked, "Why did you come out?" Willow paused, her gaze falling on Makoto. He was gentle and refined, the kind of warm guy that girls easily fall for, quite the contrast to George's brashness. Because of his humble background, Makoto was somewhat timid, always speaking softly. During the time she was with Makoto, she had grown quite fed up with George and easily developed feelings for him. Moreover, her connection with Makoto began with a classic hero saving the damsel scenario. Many women harbor romantic fantasies of being saved by a hero, so her feelings for Makoto were very different from the frivolities she experienced with her previous boyfriends. Makoto said tenderly, "I heard George is back. I just thought you might not want to continue with the engagement today. I can understand that." He smiled lightly, his gaze sincere as he looked into Willow's eyes. In relationships, many men struggle with expressing their feelings and emotions. Their delicate words often trigger resistance, and they sometimes forget what they intended to say, halting in awkwardness. But there are also men who, though not eloquent, convey their feelings through a look or a gesture, expressing deep emotion without needing to say the words. At that moment, Makoto's eyes clearly had that effect. Willow replied, "How could that be?" She shook her head vigorously and nestled into Makoto's embrace, saying, "Makoto, don't worry. I'll never leave him." Makoto nodded, holding Willow's shoulders and gently patting her. "Willow, I'm okay. Whatever choice you make, as long as it's what you truly want, I'll be happy for you." Although his eyes were slightly red, revealing his reluctance, his words comforted Willow. She playfully rubbed against his chest, wishing she could stay in Makoto's warm embrace forever. Domingo, with a gleeful smile, chimed in, "How could that be, Cheng? My sister doesn't like George at all. He's arrogant and aggressive. My sister is sick of him. How could she possibly want to go back to him?" Domingo also held a strong dislike for George. His reasons were rooted in personal logic. He always saw himself as the sole heir of the Liu family, despite his uncle and aunt running the Liu group and Willow being their only daughter. Deep down, he fantasized that if George hadn't been adopted, he, as the only male descendant, would eventually inherit the family business. This fantasy floated lightly in his mind, lacking substance but not quite shameless. Perhaps if he reflected on it, he could differentiate between illusion and reality. Yet this deep-rooted fantasy intensified his emotions, making him irrationally resentful toward George. Over the years, he took great pleasure in seeing George humiliated. Now that George had been sent to Harbor City, hardly anyone had come to see him off. In fact, his belongings had been packed and sent ahead 2 weeks prior, as if the family was eager to get rid of him. Domingo felt quite satisfied at the moment. As long as it wasn't George, he would support whoever became his brother-in-law. Willow suddenly looked at Domingo with confusion. "Aren't you usually on good terms with George?" Domingo sneered. "How could I be on good terms with him? I despise George more than anyone." Now that the dust had settled, he felt no need to pretend. He had once feigned brotherhood with George, but now that he didn't have to, he felt refreshingly free. Thus, he didn't notice the unusual expression on Willow's face. Still talking to himself, he said, "Sister, why don't you stay with your fiancé? I'll go deal with George." "Don't worry, I'll make sure he gets humiliated." Willow asked. "What do you want to do?" He replied, "I'll find some bodyguards to beat him up and throw him out the door. If he dares to crash someone else's engagement, his parents have no face to show." Willow suddenly raised her hand. The sharp sound of a slap echoed, leaving everyone stunned, especially Makoto. He furrowed his brows, sensing trouble. He saw Willow's eyes welling up with tears. Domingo glared, shouting, "Sister, what does this mean?" Willow said calmly, "George is still my nominal brother." Her face was pale with unspoken emotion. "You call him brother, but secretly think of humiliating him." "You really disgust me." Domingo, gritting his teeth, retorted, "What do you mean I disgust you? What are you acting for? You clearly hate him the most. Everyone can see through your thoughts. Why are you suddenly playing the saint?" Willow stood there silent for a long time. Did she really hate George as much as they said? Yet when George first came to the Liu family, they had the best relationship. She would obediently follow her brother, sharing her favorite candies with him. She would cling to him for stories, telling everyone he was her favorite. When she fell and got hurt, it was George who comforted her and carried her home. When she was bullied at school, George was the first to rush to her aid. Even the first time she got her period, it was he who bought her sanitary pads. George had always cared for her, and she used to depend on him so much. She had liked being close to George from the very beginning. When did that change? Willow felt a sudden confusion within. Makoto's sigh snapped her back to reality. That's right. It must have been George who changed first. He became more arrogant as he grew up, coddled by the Liu family with an increasingly overbearing nature. He had strong possessiveness and dominance, forbidding her from dating other men and often flying into a rage. That's why she grew to hate him more and more, distancing herself from him. It had to be that way. So she wanted the Liu family to send him away, to put him as far from her as possible, to Harbor City. She only wanted George to respect her and understand her need for freedom. Once he realized that, she would naturally seek him out. With so many years of connection between them, how could she really bear to be so far apart? But now it seemed that George was still stubborn. On such a joyous day, he continued to ruin her happiness. He was truly despicable. As soon as he arrived, he turned the Liu family into chaos and sowed discord between the siblings. It was easy to understand this mentality. It was far easier to blame others than to admit one's own mistakes. Instead of reflecting on his actions, it was safer for him to stick to his established path. Willow had clearly given George hints more than once, even sabotaging his relationships, but at this moment she was blaming him for not allowing her to date others, completely forgetting her own actions. She had slapped her own brother, yet blamed George for the turmoil in the Liu family. By ignoring and forgetting her own detrimental behaviors, she created a causal chain that made her feel utterly justified, as if she were always on the right path. Willow thought she had figured it all out, yet tears flowed uncontrollably. She felt a sense of unease but instinctively blamed George, tightly clutching Makoto as she choked out, "I'm sorry, Makoto. I've been blaming George on such a good day. I have to make it clear to him. I won't let him ruin our engagement." Makoto wiped Willow's tears and let go, standing quietly as he watched her retreating figure. He was troubled. Domingo's earlier questioning made a lot of sense. Everyone knew that Willow hated George the most. But because of just a few of Domingo's words, she had slapped her own cousin. Did she really hate George? Or perhaps deep down she saw George as different from anyone else? When Willow reached the entrance, she did not see George. However, his Honda Accord was parked quietly nearby. Standing next to the car was his best friend, David. Willow's steps halted abruptly, her heart feeling as if it had dropped. At that moment, she remembered that George had given this car to David before leaving Beijing. As David approached her, he held out a red envelope. His expression was neutral as he straightforwardly said, "George asked me to give you and Makoto this red envelope." Willow didn't reach out to take it. David frowned. "There's also something else." "What is it?" "George left in a hurry and hasn't had the chance to see you. He called you a few times, but you didn't answer. So he hasn't been able to get it back from you. Remember that antique jade bracelet he gave you for your birthday? That was a token from his father to his mother." David smirked slightly, saying, "George said this bracelet is meant for his future wife. Now that it's with you, it feels quite inappropriate. Miss Liu, could you give me the bracelet? I'll bring it to George when I visit him in Harbor City." Willow suddenly looked down, her gaze falling on the jade bracelet on her wrist. That morning, she had inexplicably chosen to wear it while getting ready, even though it didn't quite match her dress. But she hadn't changed it. Now looking at the bracelet, it felt glaring. Meant for a future wife? The thought of George possibly marrying another girl, someone who would share a bed with him, stirred discomfort in her heart. George liked her so much. How could he marry someone else? Now, instead of coming himself, he sent David to demand the bracelet. It was nothing but a ploy to manipulate her. How infuriating. Indeed, Willow was disturbed by his actions. Seeing that she hadn't replied for a while, David called out, "Miss Liu." Willow lifted her head and said dismissively,
"You tell George there's no way to take back a gift once it's given."
"Of course, if he insists, then let him come and ask me himself." After saying this, Willow turned to leave. David stopped her, gritting his teeth. "Miss Liu, wait a moment. I'll have George speak to you personally." He thought to himself, what a joke. George was getting married. How could such a meaningful jade bracelet stay with another woman? George had repeatedly emphasized the importance of retrieving it before his wedding. He wanted to personally put it on his wife's wrist that day. David had long found Willow insufferable, but George was blind and foolish, getting strung along for so long and then tossed aside. Just thinking about it made David want to punch Willow. But now he had finally come to terms with it. George had found such a great wife. He was genuinely happy for his friend and was determined to fulfill his mission. When I received David's call, the car was almost at Anna's house. I asked David, "What's up?" He replied, "George, I went to get the bracelet from Willow like you said, but she won't give it to me. She said if you really want it, you should talk to her yourself." I instinctively glanced at Anna beside me, feeling inexplicably guilty. I wasn't very familiar with her yet. Even though her makeup looked sweet and bright, instantly likable with peach blush and dewy light pink lip gloss, her clear, bright eyes and composed demeanor gave off a certain distance. Even sitting in the car, she maintained a graceful posture, and her occasional smile radiated poise. That natural air of a rich girl made me feel a bit uneasy. Before I could speak to David, Willow's voice came through on the line. "George, do you want the bracelet, or are you just trying to make me look bad?" I was momentarily stunned and let out a laugh in frustration. She continued, "If you're trying to disrupt my engagement with Makoto, then I suggest you don't waste your effort. If you want the bracelet back, then you should take it back just like you gave it to me. After all, something so valuable, I won't just hand it back through someone else. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my tone calm. David is my best friend. You can just give it to him. I'll bear all the consequences myself. Willow sneered. George, how much clearer can I be? You should take it back the same way you gave it to me. Then she hung up. I felt a surge of anger. How did I give her that bracelet? It was on my 20th birthday. Willow and I were both drunk. She secretly pulled me into her room, saying she had a gift for me. The next moment, she tiptoed and kissed me. I pushed her against the door and deepened the kiss. In the end, she patted my shoulder and I finally restrained myself. Before leaving, I asked her to wait, went back to get the bracelet and put it on her wrist. I told her its significance. She said nothing but shyly accepted it. Because of that, I thought she had tacitly accepted my feelings. These past few years felt like a terrible dream. Now that I was awake, I just wanted to completely sever ties with the past. I thought Willow would be eager to return it, like throwing away trash. But I never expected her to say that. It was then that I realized youthful folly must one day come with a price. If that bracelet hadn't held such meaning, I wouldn't have cared about getting it back. But now that I was getting married, leaving the bracelet with Willow would be unfair to Anna. What happened? Anna's gentle voice suddenly broke in. I instinctively looked up, our eyes meeting. I didn't want to hide anything, but because we were still getting to know each other, I found it hard to speak. I ultimately shook my head and said, nothing. I calculated that at worst I could ask Uncle Lou for help. If that didn't work, I wouldn't mind taking some firm measures. I just had to get it back. With that determination, I gradually relaxed. Really nothing, just a small matter with Uncle Lou's family. I put on a light-hearted expression and smiled at Anna. I'll handle it. Anna didn't press further. She just nodded lightly and said, George, I trust you. But I'm your future wife, so if you encounter difficulties, you must tell me. I'll share the burden with you. Hearing future wife made my neck heat up. I was already engaged. In half a month, Anna would be my wife. Bittersweet feelings swirled inside me, but amidst it all, I felt a glimmer of hope. I smiled at her and gently nodded. The car arrived at Anna's house. I got out first and then turned to help her. I noticed the engagement ring on her finger. Since she put it on that day, she hadn't taken it off. As I helped her out of the car, she didn't let go of my hand. Instead, she squeezed it tightly. At first, I felt a bit awkward, but her soft, warm hand suddenly brought me immense calm. It felt like this was how it should be. From a distance, Aunt Zhao saw us holding hands and smiled appreciatively. Before we could get close, Aunt Zhao quickly came over and hugged me, tears welling in her eyes. George, seeing you reminds me of your mother. It's been so long since I saw her. I felt a surge of emotions. It was a distant memory, but her scent overlapped with the faint recollection of my mother. Anna stood beside us, quickly teasing. Auntie, you're making George feel smothered. Aunt Zhao had married Anna's father at 40. She never had children of her own, but treated these non-blood-related kids as her own. Anna had always respected her. I had long known this, so I never understood why Anna agreed to this verbal marriage agreement. After all, it had nothing to do with her. But Aunt Zhao assured me that one day I would understand, so I didn't ask further. Aunt Zhao smiled, released me, and wiped her tears. George, come home with me. I instinctively looked at Anna. She was watching me too. Behind us, the greenery was lush and vibrant. When I looked over, Anna's eyes sparkled with warmth. She reached out her hand to me. George, let's go home. With 20 minutes to go until 6 o'clock, Makoto had finished his pre-ceremony preparations. But Willow had yet to come out of the makeup room upstairs. After a moment of hesitation, Makoto walked over. The makeup room door was unlocked and faint voices drifted out. A woman's voice asked, Willow, is George really not coming back? Another replied, if he was going to, he would have by now. Even a rocket couldn't get him here on time. The first voice continued, Willow, I've actually been wanting to ask you for a long time. Do you really have no feelings for George at all? You grew up together. He's always taken care of and protected you. He's always had eyes only for you. Makoto paused, instinctively furrowing his brow. There was a long silence before Willow finally spoke up. I have no feelings. Would you have feelings for a simp? She scoffed in feigned contempt, but deep down she remembered. George was only a few months older than her, always treating her like an older brother, caring for her, protecting her, making sure she never got bullied during school years. She recalled the night of George's birthday, when she kissed him, believing it must have been the alcohol that made her dizzy. She remembered the bracelet he gave her, which she had accepted. The first voice chimed in again. Such a handsome simp. I definitely have feelings for that. Another voice echoed. Yeah, several of my friends have their eyes on him. Remember last year's horse racing event? The first voice said. Of course. He wore a black rider's jacket and won the championship. I still remember how he stood on the podium, took off his hat, and smiled confidently. It was so charming. Willow remembered too. She recalled that day, George on stage during his speech, saying he wanted to dedicate his victory to a special someone in his heart. He was so happy, showering her with attention, boasting about his medal and pony. He talked endlessly, and when Willow ignored him, he teased her about the beautiful lady presenting the awards. At that moment, she glared at him. Only when he said he had eyes only for her, that Anna had just caught a glimpse, did she feel relieved, a smile finally tugging at her lips. Both she and George loved horseback riding. George's pony was still being raised at the Liu family ranch. The next moment, Makoto suddenly pushed the door open, interrupting Willow's thoughts. Willow, he said, dressed in a deep blue single-breasted suit, a replica of Liu's original engagement suit. Liu had come from humble beginnings, and the story of him rescuing a beauty to spark a romance was still fondly recalled by many. Willow's greatest pride in life was her parents' deep love for each other. Perhaps that was why, when Makoto saved her, she developed special feelings for him. Now, standing before her, Makoto resembled her father in those old photos, gentle and steady. Willow's heart was once again enveloped by that sense of fate. Many believed in destiny, either as mere coincidence or as something written in the stars. That feeling was so strong that even if emotions were lacking, it could be filled with the thrill brought by fate. So even though she had never considered taking the step of engagement and marriage with Makoto, today she suddenly felt it was right to complete the engagement ceremony with him. Makoto smiled at her and reached out his hand. Willow stood up, lifting her skirt to walk over. I was worried because you didn't come downstairs for so long, Makoto said. Willow replied, It's fine now, let's go. Makoto asked, Is everything okay with George? Willow's gaze flickered to the bracelet on her wrist. George is arrogant and self-righteous. He should just stay in Hong Kong forever. I never want to see him again. Makoto felt a sudden thrill of joy inside, but he maintained a worried expression. Isn't that a bit harsh? After all, he's... Willow interrupted. It doesn't matter who he is, I just don't want to see him again. She gently linked her arm with Makoto's. Makoto said nothing more and led Willow downstairs. It was 6 o'clock. His engagement ceremony was about to begin. From this day forward, Makoto would no longer live a life of poverty. He would no longer have to live in a mixed neighborhood or share a small room with his 2 younger brothers. His family would rise with him. Willow was the only opportunity fate had bestowed upon him to transcend social classes. He would hold on to her tightly and never let her go. Anna and I set our wedding date for half a month later. Time was tight, yet Anna's family had already been preparing for our wedding many years ago. So even though we were busy, things were progressing smoothly. Aunt Zhao told me that Anna had fallen seriously ill when she was young. After she recovered, her father took her to worship Buddha, saying she must marry in September of her 25th year to ensure a long and healthy life. Anna's family took these beliefs seriously. When Aunt Zhao first mentioned this marriage over the phone, she calculated my birth date. It turned out that Anna and I were a perfect match in terms of destiny. So when I agreed to the engagement, the entire family was overjoyed. I received many precious gifts. The most meaningful one was an antique brooch left by Anna's mother. When Anna handed it to me, I felt guilty. The most appropriate return gift would be the pair of bracelets my father had given my mother, but they were still with Willow. Perhaps noticing my gloomy mood, Anna took me to the garden for a walk.
George, are you unhappy?
She asked, her eyes filled with concern. My gaze fell on the shiny blue brooch on my chest. Even if I had no knowledge of antiques, I knew it was invaluable. Since childhood, I couldn't stand it when others treated me well. For every bit of kindness shown to me, I felt I had to repay it 10-fold, 100-fold. I mentally calculated the gifts I could give Anna, but every option felt insufficient. Already feeling guilty, encountering Anna's gentle gaze ignited a surge of anger within me. Years of obliviousness had turned me into a complete fool. I suddenly laughed, yet tears pricked my eyes amidst the laughter. Anna looked panicked and hurriedly pulled out a handkerchief from her pocket to wipe the moisture from my eyes. I waved my hand, casually wiping my eyes, and said, "It's not that I'm unhappy, it's just that I suddenly realized how foolish the past was." She paused, then seriously replied, "No, George. No matter what you've been through or what others say about you, I think you're amazing. As long as you take things seriously, you'll succeed in anything." Her sincere praise nearly made me lose myself. I laughed and said, "Anna, you're making me feel embarrassed. Who can withstand such flattery?" She suddenly blushed and whispered, "I've only ever praised you." I asked, "Haven't you ever had a boyfriend?" She answered, "Does kindergarten count?" I was taken aback. "Haven't you dated anyone after growing up?" She looked down and shook her head in silence. I pressed on, "Have you ever liked someone?" Anna hesitated for a few seconds before finally saying, "Yes, but unfortunately he didn't like me back." A faint understanding began to dawn on me. So that was it. Perhaps Anna had a crush on someone who loved someone else, which led her to agree to this engagement in despair. For some reason, an uncomfortable feeling surged in my heart, but I quickly comforted myself. Maybe it was better this way. At least I wouldn't feel too guilty. When I left that day, Anna said to me, "George, I hope you can see me as your future wife from the heart. I know you tend to keep many things to yourself, but if you could occasionally share or talk to me about them, it would make me very happy." I felt that my heart had indeed begun to open up slightly. I nodded and said, "Anna, I will." I gave Anna a pink diamond ring as a gift. It wasn't particularly expensive, but it was a design I had sketched myself on a whim. This gift felt pure as I hadn't designed it for Willow. I had simply been thinking of my parents, translating my longing into every line of the pencil strokes. The wedding preparations were in full swing, but we had not announced it publicly. I didn't want to be ostentatious, especially since my affairs with Willow were still unresolved. When I left, Willow had probably already decided never to see me again, so all my belongings were packed and sent to Port City. This included all the little gifts she had given me over the years, like the box of paper cranes she folded for me as a child, the candy wrappers from the chocolates she gave me on Valentine's Day in high school, and the tie she gifted me on my first day at work. Among these was one special gift, a set of rings she secretly bought during college. They weren't valuable, but I cherished them like treasures, because a gift like a ring carries an extra layer of meaning for a girl. Seeing it made me tolerate all her bad moods. But now I had slowly come to understand. When someone never liked you, even if you have a marriage certificate, it's as if it doesn't exist at all, let alone these material things. As I sorted through Willow's gifts one by one, my heart felt strangely calm, without a ripple of emotion. By the end, the box was empty, and my heart felt lighter than ever before. As I was preparing to send the package, my phone suddenly buzzed with several WeChat messages. It was from the staff at the horse ranch. My little horse was sick, refusing to eat grass and hay. Seeing the photo, I was frantic. The staff said the little horse must miss me since I usually visited every few days, but this time I hadn't gone on schedule. I hurriedly called to inquire. On the other end, they said, "Mr. George, Miss Lou is also here. Let her talk to you." I was taken aback, and Willow's voice came through clearly. "George, didn't you forget your promise when we raised this little horse? How can you be so irresponsible?" Of course I hadn't forgotten. The children in the Lou family all have their own pets, but the only requirement is that you must take full responsibility for the pet you choose and care for it well. You must never abandon it halfway. I said, "Isn't it you who asked Uncle Lou to arrange my trip to Port City?" Willow replied, "George, why do you always make excuses? If you really cared about the little horse, you wouldn't have left it. You would refuse your dad's arrangements and not go to Port City. In short, you don't really care about your little horse." In that moment, Willow's heart skipped a beat. It seemed she suddenly heard her own underlying message. George actually didn't care much about her either. Otherwise, he wouldn't have really gone to Port City. He wouldn't be indifferent upon learning of her engagement. He wouldn't have missed the engagement ceremony. He wouldn't be taking back the jade bracelet he gifted her. "Willow, I'm not in the mood to scold you, so I advise you not to stir up trouble. I'll make time to go back and see it. If possible, I also plan to bring it to Port City." Willow's voice trembled, tinged with frustration, as she said, "Are you planning to never return to Beijing?" I just smiled and said, "Why not? Yes, I was going to rebuild my family in Port City, so my focus on life and work would naturally shift here. But there was no need to tell Willow any of this. Willow coldly said, "George, you always have to be so clever with your words. How immature can you be? You better not regret it, George." I was speechless and asked, "Regret what?" She replied, "I'm engaged to Makoto now." I asked, "What of it?" She said, "The wedding date is being finalized." I responded, "And then?" She said, "George, don't tell me you don't understand. If I really marry Makoto, you—" I laughed, feeling relieved and pleased, and said, "Sis, it's a good thing for you to get married. Do you want me to give you a big red envelope?" On the other end of the line, Willow suddenly fell silent. I didn't wait for her to say anything else, I just hung up. When we were 16, we had our first crush, and from then on, things spiraled out of control. She wouldn't let me call her sister, and she refused to call me brother. Now, after all these years, we had finally returned to the most appropriate position. I had no interest in hating her or blaming her. After so many years of companionship, giving a red envelope was only right. I called Uncle Liu. After greeting him and Aunt Liu, I delicately brought up the matter of the bracelet. I said, "Uncle Liu, I was young and foolish a couple of years ago, causing quite a few misunderstandings. Now that I think about it, I always feel regret and shame. Since my sister is engaged now, I think it's best not to cause any unnecessary misunderstandings." Uncle Liu sighed on the phone. He said, "George, I've always liked you and regarded you as my own son. I've actually always wanted you to be our family's son-in-law. Your aunt has been shedding tears talking about you these past few days. I understood their sadness. I felt difficult too, but that sadness was only because of the sincere love from the two elders. So I said, 'Uncle, feelings cannot be forced. You can't make a sweet melon grow from a bitter vine.' He said, 'Willow is too willful, she just—'" I interrupted. "It's nothing, Uncle. If my sister likes someone, she should marry whoever she wants." He paused for a moment and said, "I will help you get that bracelet back. In a few days, your aunt and I will go to Port City for a wedding. I'll personally give you the bracelet then." I thanked him and hung up the phone. The staff handling the shipping had also arrived. The carefully packed gift box was loaded onto the truck. In a few days, it would be safely delivered to Willow. Soon, Uncle Liu and the others would arrive in Port City. When the jade bracelet was returned to me, the absurdity of those youthful days would finally come to an end. From then on, Willow and George would no longer have anything to do with each other. After Willow got engaged, she began meeting her friends more often. One day, when she went to the bathroom, she overheard David talking on the phone. He said, "Bro, I'm heading to Port City tomorrow. We agreed your wife would introduce me to a bridesmaid." "What? Your wife found 7 bridesmaids?" "George, oh George, fate has been cruel for too long. If you don't mind, I'd even be willing to call you father." Willow stood in the long, empty hallway, David's excited voice still echoing in her ears. But in the end, only that name, George, remained. She thought maybe she was drunk. Otherwise, how could she be hearing such absurd jokes? Yes, she told herself she was really drunk, which was why she misheard things. Or perhaps it was simply because she missed George so much that she mistook someone else's name for his. Staggering against the wall, she called out to David. Startled, David had just finished his call when he turned to her. "Willow," he asked. She demanded, "Who were you just talking to?" She stared into his eyes and said, "I heard you say you were going to Port City for a wedding, and I heard George's name." Her usually stunning face now carried a trace of distortion, and her eyes, which normally sparkled, were filled with unshed tears. She forced a smile, but it was cold and desperate. "Don't tell me you're going to attend George's wedding." At first, David didn't understand, but then realization struck. What a twist of fate. For years, David had been anxious because of George, but now he felt secretly pleased. The proud daughter of the Liu family was now experiencing this. Wasn't she the one who loved to keep people dangling? Wasn't she the one who enjoyed watching those who liked her suffer? From now on, she would have countless chances to feel that same pain. But David would never tell her the truth. George had forbidden him from speaking, and he would never allow Willow to run to Port City to stir up trouble. That day was George's most important day, and David would never let this scheming girl ruin it. So he sneered and said, "You misheard. I am indeed going to Port City for a wedding, but I'm going with George because one of our former classmates is getting married." Willow didn't seem convinced. "I've never heard that George had any close classmates in Port City," David smirked. "Willow, do you even know George? You only enjoy the feeling of being adored, so his identity, his life, his thoughts, they're irrelevant to you. What nonsense are you spouting now? George is my buddy, one of the people I admire most in my life. I'll tell you this, I'm cheering for your breakup with him. You're not worthy of his affection all these years. After saying that, he turned and left. Willow stood watching his disappearing figure, her heart suddenly aching, though she couldn't explain why. She only felt an overwhelming urge to see George, even if it was just for a moment. But the next day, Willow received a large package from Port City. It had arrived so quickly because Anna had arranged for a private jet to deliver it to Beijing. At the time, I was completely focused on preparing the wedding venue, unaware of any of this. When Willow opened the boxes, her body inexplicably trembled. At first, the things inside seemed unfamiliar, but soon memories flooded her like a tidal wave. The first couple bracelets she had given George. He hadn't liked the style, thought it too childish, yet still wore it dutifully. The little stars she had given him, the stickers, the colorful little gems filling an entire box. And at the very end, there was the set of matching rings. Holding the small box tightly, Willow's vision blurred. In her ears, she heard a voice from long ago. "Willow, you're practically George's shadow now. When do you plan to marry him?" Back then, the kids often teased her and George like that. At 20, she was young, playful, headstrong, and surrounded by many suitors, but she dismissed them all. With handsome, cheerful George by her side, she would link arms with him and make countless friends envious. She was happy, because that wonderful George liked only her. At the time, she wanted to marry him. To be precise, she had known for a long time that she would marry him someday. That was why she gave him that small token, that cheap set of rings. But when did she start to tire of George? When did fate defeat her childhood companion? Was it that she truly felt nothing for him? Or was it simply because she believed with certainty that he would never leave her? Clutching the rings tightly, Willow suddenly, absurdly, burst into tears. Meanwhile, I was busy with the final wedding rehearsal, unaware of any of this. Willow was looking at those gifts from the past decade, especially the rings I treasured. And during the rehearsal, when I kissed Anna for the first time, I had no idea that Willow would slap Makoto hard because of that same ring. How ridiculous. The day Makoto mocked me, set me up, and forced me into striking him, none of us imagined a day like this would come. But now Willow and Makoto were no longer important people in my life. I didn't care at all. When Uncle Lou brought the jade bracelet to me, I told my parents the good news about my upcoming wedding. They were surprised because the wedding they had come to Hong Kong for was Anna's, and they never expected that the mysterious groom, never photographed by the media, would be me. They were happy for me, but their joy was mixed with tears, especially Aunt Lou. She held my hand tightly, unwilling to let go. She said, "George, I don't want to cry on your big day, but I can't help it. It's my fault. I didn't raise my daughter well, and she kept taking the wrong steps." Willow wanted to break up with Makoto, but he refused. His entire family came to the Liu household, making a scene and even threatening not to leave. They had nothing to lose. While they were causing trouble, Willow discovered she was pregnant, so their marriage was most likely going to be finalized. I gently hugged Aunt Lou back, my eyes slightly wet as memories of my early days at the Liu's resurfaced. Back then, I cried every night, searching for my parents, and Aunt Lou would comfort me again and again. I remembered those carefree days when they treated me like their own son. Hoarsely, I said, "Uncle, Aunt, it's not your fault." In the end, she wiped her tears and said, "Child, it's Willow who isn't blessed. But Aunt sees Anna as a very good girl, and I believe you will be happy together." I knew that with a woman as gentle, caring, and understanding as Anna, even if she didn't love me, our marriage would still be harmonious. But I never expected happiness to be so much stronger than I had imagined. When I placed the jade bracelet on Anna's wrist, she showed me a photo. In it, I was holding a trophy, smiling proudly at the audience, while Anna stood beside me smiling at me. That year at the horse racing festival, when I won the championship, it was Anna who presented the award and placed the medal around my neck. But at the time, my entire heart was focused on Willow. I only glanced at Anna briefly and knew only that she was beautiful. Who would have thought fate would later bring us here? I smiled like a child, pointing at the photo, but couldn't say a word. Anna hugged me from behind and said, "Do you remember I once told you I had someone I liked?" Touching the jade bracelet, her cheek brushing against my back, she whispered, "George, I told myself that when I received this bracelet, I would finally tell you. The person I love is you. In college, I loved browsing Big Orange's tweets. There was a phrase often used to describe certain scenes, crazy flipping the pan. At the time, I didn't understand what it meant until the wedding night, when the bride shed her daytime modesty and I turned into a chef. I cooked with all my energy, stir-frying and searing a grand banquet, tireless in my efforts. But the next day I was completely exhausted, sleeping until noon. By then, Anna had already gone for a run, eaten breakfast, swum, bathed, and carried on with her day. A few days after the wedding, the housekeeper told me with a smile, "Sir, you have no idea how much Miss Anna smiled that day. In all the years I've worked here, it was the first time I saw her talk so much in the morning. She greeted everyone, even my little grandson. I think Miss was so happy she wanted to tell the whole world she got married and loves her husband." I couldn't help but laugh. Sent the housekeeper away with an excuse and sat alone in the garden reading the news. From a distance, I saw Anna's car pull in. She immediately got out looking for me. I waved from the garden with a smile, calling her name. The day before, Anna had secretly arranged for my little horse to be sent to Hong Kong, well cared for during the journey and arriving without any discomfort. When I saw it happily circling around Anna, I smiled too. Pushing through the greenery, I walked toward her, but she had already run into my arms. I opened them wide, holding her tightly. On George's wedding day, Willow finally learned the truth. At first, she refused to believe it, naively convincing herself the so-called wedding was nothing more than another play George had staged, like her own engagement to Makoto, with no real meaning. But when her friends sent her photos from the ceremony, George in a tailored suit standing beside his bride, her parents seated in the VIP section, David shamelessly flirting with the bridesmaids, and the handsome groom kissing his bride as she wept tears of joy. Willow felt a deafening crash inside her as something collapsed completely. She was dazed, unable to hear her friend's words. All that echoed in her mind was one truth. George was married. George was now someone else's husband, but hadn't George always loved her? Since they were children, hadn't he always hoped she would marry him? On her 20th birthday, he had personally placed the most meaningful jade bracelet on her wrist. They had made a promise. And if Willow truly had no feelings for him, why did she let George chase away one male friend after another? The truth was, she had been using him all along. Back then, as a wealthy young lady, she had countless suitors. She loved watching men fight over her. She adored classic Western novels, fantasizing about being a noblewoman while lovers dueled for her. Yet she knew she was only playing, never serious about dating any of them. George always thought she had 4 boyfriends, but after he confronted them, they all broke up. What he didn't know was that she had never truly dated them. After a few flirty days, she would tire of the game. But being a noble girl, she couldn't play the villain herself. So George, her childhood friend, became her perfect tool. She deliberately encouraged him. George, with his fierce temper, would instantly get angry at the idea of someone mistreating Willow. Whenever Domingo or others fueled the fire, George would rush in to teach the foolish boys a lesson. Willow, of course, would act heartbroken, claiming she was forced to break up by her brother. But inside, she secretly delighted in it. She particularly enjoyed watching George act angry for her, liked watching him play her devoted knight, chasing away bothersome suitors. His protectiveness was domineering yet somewhat sad, but George would always forgive her. As long as she acted cute, said sweet words, spent time with him, or gave him affection, his anger would quickly vanish. She always thought it would be the same this time too. She thought no matter how big her mistake, George would forgive her. After all, George had lost his parents and grown up in the Liu household. Where else could he go? Everyone assumed they would end up married eventually. Even when Willow was willful enough to get engaged to Makoto, she believed George would remain hers. But now George had married someone else. He had a wife, a woman standing beside him. Willow could no longer take her place by his side. On the day George and his wife returned to the capital, Willow had just had a bitter fight with Makoto. She moved out of their apartment, determined to cut ties completely. But when a friend sent her a hotel corridor video, she suddenly realized her entire relationship with Makoto had been calculated from the start. The seemingly gentle, kind man was actually despicable. She couldn't bear to think of that day. couldn't bear to imagine how disappointed George must have been in her. She wished she could go back and strangle that pathetic version of herself. 15 years she had been with George, and why had she acted so crazily humiliating him? It was from that very moment she completely lost him. She had lost George forever. So now, when George walked into the living room holding his wife's hand, Willow immediately noticed the antique jade bracelet on Anna's wrist. A sharp pain pierced her heart, an overwhelming, inescapable agony. Yet she forced herself to maintain her composure, silently following her parents, watching from behind, watching his happiness. That day, Willow didn't say a single word. She didn't even dare to look at George more than once. Her hands resting on her knees clenched tightly, almost piercing her palm. Yet she seemed to feel no pain at all. She was somewhat impressed with herself. How could she keep a calm smile on her face the whole time? It wasn't until George was about to leave that she realized her face was starting to freeze. As he was leaving, he called out to her. He called her sister, just like when he had first come to their home. Willow heard it clearly and understood it well. George truly had no feelings for her anymore. The last thing he said to her that day was, "Sister, I hope you can find your own happiness in the future." She nodded, but inside it was pouring rain. She couldn't do it, but she couldn't tell him. After breaking up with Makoto, the entire Liu family was dragged into a shameful scandal. That was when Willow discovered she was pregnant. But she absolutely didn't want the child, nor did she want to be with Makoto again. She couldn't accept that her future husband would be the father of her child, especially since he had been plotting against her from the very beginning. The so-called heroic rescue, the replay of parental love, everything had been lies, just lies. Makoto had simply been using her as a stepping stone to make a fortune. She didn't want this child, but Makoto blocked her at every turn. He even brought his parents with him. Willow had never encountered such shameless, lowly people. They were relentless, throwing tantrums, using every trick in the book. The Liu family was a cultured family, and her parents couldn't afford to lose face in public like this. She couldn't even call the police. Overwhelmed, Mr. and Mrs. Liu could only pay them off to leave, but once those people tasted blood, they were even less willing to let go. They were like leeches, like vampires, like maggots, like a nightmare that would never end. Willow was exhausted by the chaos Makoto's family brought, and as her belly grew larger, she finally decided to tear off the shameful facade herself. When the police finally came to the Liu family home and chased those ruffians away, Makoto seemed to realize he had no chance left. Yet he still managed to extort a large sum of money with his leverage. On the day of the confrontation, Willow felt as if she were meeting Makoto for the very first time. He was cold, petty, greedy, twisted, and delightfully ugly. When Mr. Liu handed the money to Makoto, Willow suddenly wanted to laugh at herself. She laughed at her foolishness, her naivety. Everything she had once taken for granted as a girl, the daily companionship of youth, faded away and lost its freshness. But a true woman, she thought, would love a man who would do everything to protect her, to encourage and support her struggles, and she was undoubtedly a complete disgrace. Later, George's wife took away his pony. When Willow went to the stable, the pony was already gone. Only her own horse was left, standing all alone in the stable. Willow let it out, mounted, and raced into the wind, going round and round tirelessly. Finally, she closed her eyes in the rushing wind and loosened the reins. She didn't die, but she lost half her life. Her parents cried heartbreakingly at her bedside. In that moment, Willow seemed to finally grow up. She endured the pain, comforting her parents, and thought to herself that her life could not continue in such an absurd way. Not long after, Makoto was sentenced to prison for extortion. Also imprisoned were his father and half-brother, the ones who had caused the most trouble. The people from Anna's family quickly scattered like a receding tide. They had gotten some money already. Although they weren't satisfied, it was still better than nothing. Returning to their hometown with the money, they no longer cared about Makoto's fate. Only Makoto's stepmother wept bitterly for her son's imprisonment, hating him. Those old stories from the capital faded like ink on an old scroll, and George's new life gradually unfolded like a fresh canvas.